Hi everyone, welcome to Art and Anxiety. In my last video, I took this Dollar Tree box and altered it using some mixed media techniques. If you haven't seen that video, I will link it in the info card and in the description box below. Today we're going to be working on the inside of the box, filling it with a tranquil garden scene, a peaceful place to go and meditate when you're feeling stressed or anxious. Unfortunately for me, the building of this project wasn't quite as calming as I hoped it would be, and we're going to come back to that. To get started though, I used tin foil crumpled up and pressed into the side of the box to build my base shape for the garden. I just pressed it into the edges and left a dip in the center because I want to put a koi pond in my meditation garden, and that's where the water is going to go. And here's where the problem started. I used paper clay, but I rolled it out too thin. And it looked lumpy with the foil under it and awful. So to smooth it out, I used another layer. And that looked a lot better, but then that layer cracked. So to fill the cracks, I used spackle, brushed it in, and let it dry before I started painting. And that leads me in to a little bit of background information on my channel and what I envision it to be. I've been watching a lot of informational videos lately about YouTube and analytics and how to get likes and interaction on your videos. And one common theme in all of this information is, what are you good at? Do what you do best. And I have anxiety, so my knee-jerk reaction when somebody asks what I'm good at is nothing. I'm not good at anything. And yes, I craft, and I have a channel that's done well, showing some of my crafts in the past, but I still hold that I don't have a great artistic eye, I'm not wonderful with color theory, and I'm not all that artistic. I want to be, but I'm not. So what business do I have making videos, and why would you want to come watch them? What is my superpower? I can answer that. I am really good at taking all of the things that go wrong and working the problem, troubleshooting, and figuring it out. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to show you all of my mess ups. I'm going to show you everything that goes wrong and show you how I worked the problem so that when you run into problems, when you're crafting or making things, you're going to feel more confident that you can fix it too. There are already enough creators on YouTube that appear to do things perfectly. I'm going to show you how I mess it up and make something that's not terrible in the end. And speaking of terrible, how you like my clouds? See, I told you I am not an artist, but I really want to be. I watch Bob Ross, I follow the Art Sherpa. They make me feel like I should be able to paint, but I can't. And about here is when I realized how terrible that actually was. But it's paint, and paint is one of the easiest things to fix. I just painted right over it and tried it again. This time, I did not go for the fluffy, gorgeous clouds that you see on a summer day. I went for something a little bit more streaky and easier to paint. If at first you don't succeed, throw paint at it until you like it. And speaking of liking things, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel out. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications when I post new content. I am trying to do that twice a week, but we'll see if I'm able to maintain it. Also, as long as you're here, leave me a comment. Let me know what your biggest art or craft fail was and what happened in the end. Did you figure something out to fix it, or did you trash the project? Let me know. I want to hear your experiences. So, there are my clouds, and not too terrible in the end. But I did realize something at this point, and that is that the clouds are actually offsetting my scale. See, I got these little fish that I'm going to repaint as koi for my pond, but now they're kind of gigantic when you compare them to the scenery. But that's okay. We're just calling them cryptids. They are monster koi in a hidden pond that cryptozoologists just haven't found yet. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. To paint these itty bitty things, I put some glue dots on a T-pin that I've embedded in some polymer clay and just stuck them on there so that I could paint them without getting my hands all full of paint. Not that I didn't anyway, but it minimized it a little bit. I just painted them white and then used orange to paint some blobs on them. I wasn't too particular about it because you're going to see them only from the top, but I did make sure to use a toothpick and dot on a couple of little eyes so that if you can see them from the side, they don't look weird. Not like they're not going to look like gigantic weird koi anyway. And then to finish them off, I just used some chalk pastels to tone down the white just a tiny bit to make them look a little bit more realistic. And there is my finished monster koi fish. Hey, Sasquatch has got to eat. To start laying in my base foliage, I used a gilding glue. The reason I used this as opposed to a white glue is because it stays tacky after it's dry, so I didn't have to work within a time frame to make sure that my grasses would stick. For the base layer of grass, I'm using 2 different colors of blended turf. Now, this is the stuff that you can find in the model train section of your craft and hobby store. It's used for making scenery for model train sets or other dioramas. The reason I'm using 2 colors is because if you only use one, it ends up looking a little flat. So I use 2 different colors and kind of lay them down in patches just to add a little bit of extra dimension. I wanted to make a little shoreline area, a place where in real life you might go and dip your toes into the water. So I laid down some glue, and then I had some little gravel left over from a kit I had done a while back, and I just used that to fill in kind of a gravelly, sandy area along the shore. To make it look like there was algae and seaweed growing under the water, I used some of the darker turf that I'd used in the grass and glued it into that beachy area where it was going to be underwater when the box was complete. I also used some of this darker green material that I have. I think it's for making bushes for model trains. but it worked really well to add some color variation for the area that's going to be underwater. Lastly, for the underwater foliage, I used some reindeer moss because it kind of looks like corally or branchy, and I know coral doesn't grow in a freshwater pond, but I thought it looked cool. And as a side note, my daughter told me that reindeer moss isn't good for the reindeers because that's what they eat, I guess. I don't know, but she told me I can't use it anymore after I finish the package I have, so I use it sparingly. So here I'm starting to add the bits of foliage that are going to make up the trees and bushes and flowers that surround my little koi pond. And I'm not gonna lie, this part was tedious as hell. It took me 2 days. On the second day, I was walking around the house, showing my project to people, saying, "Is it done? Am I done? Does it need anything more? Please tell me I'm done. Please." And it would have been a lot easier if I'd used the right glue. You know that sound that your tools make when you throw them down in disgust? Yeah, there was a lot of that. So let's just skip ahead a couple days. Even though I used a couple different colors of turf, it was still looking very uniform and flat. So I used a paint wash, the same one I mentioned in another video that Black Magic Craft has the recipe for. I will link that video for you. I used that, I added some extra brown, and just kind of dabbed it in spots where I would expect the grass would be darker, under bushes and trees, by the shoreline. You get the idea. And that gave the project a lot more dimension and a lot more realism. Then, to set everything into place before I moved on to the next step, I just gave it a spray with a really watered down mixture of PVA glue. Now for the fun part. I love resin. As a nail tech doing gel polish manicures all the time, I was basically playing with resin all day. So this feels very natural to me. So to get my fish to stand upright and not be floating on their sides, I just tinted a little bit of UV resin with some alcohol ink and flash cured them into place. Now, you're gonna see I was really struggling trying to get this second fish into the position I wanted it in. My hands were shaking, I kept dropping him, and it just wasn't working for me. There we go, fish down. See, don't be afraid to stop what you're doing and reassess and come at it from a different angle. If it's not working, it's not working for a reason. Once I switched up my angle, I got him in no problem at all. When I'm working with resin, I flash cure it for 5 or 10 seconds just to get it to hold. And then once I have everything in place, I do a full cure. It's really important to cure your resin completely. Usually with craft resin, that's about 3 minutes, but uncured resin is really bad for you. So make sure you do the full cure. Once my cryptid koi were in place, I used 2-part resin that was again colored with some blue alcohol ink to fill in the bottom part of my pond. I filled my pond in 3 layers, and I did that because I had 3 goldfish and I wanted to give them some depth and set one of them up higher than the other 2. I also colored each layer a little bit lighter than the one before it to give the water some added depth and make the plants look even more realistic. In between my layers, once they had hardened, I also used a dark green paint and a dotter tool to dot on some little lily pad type plants. I didn't get too crazy making them look ultra realistic. It just gave a little bit more depth to that water. When you're working with 2-part resin in layers like this, it's not really important that you let each layer cure completely. It is important though to hit each layer with a heat gun or a torch to make sure you get rid of all the bubbles. So once my last layer was complete, which was the lightest layer that I poured, I thought about leaving it clear, but in the end I did add a little bit of color. I kind of wish I'd left it clear, but that's neither here nor there. I would have been done with this project, except for some reason my resin seeped into that turf that I laid down for the grass. I actually thought I might have blown it up there when I hit it with the heat gun on the final layer, but I watched the footage and I didn't. It just kind of got wicked up into it, I guess. So now I had another problem to fix, and my first thought was to use my Ultra Matte sealer, and I brushed it on over those super shiny areas. But when it dried, it had this really weird rubbery texture that wasn't shiny but also wasn't flat either, and it probably looked worse than just the resin did. So then I thought, well, maybe if I dry brush over it, a green that matches the grass, it will fool the eye and you won't see that rubbery texture. And it did look a lot better after I had dry brushed it, but it also still looked weird. It still looked rubbery. So that didn't do the trick either. In the end, I just got my glue and my turf back out and sprinkled some new grass over those areas, and now you can barely tell there was a problem to begin with, so it's what I should have done from the start. The very last thing I wanted to do to finish off this project completely is add another affirmation like I have on the lid of the box. So I cut these words out of mat board using my laser cutter. If you have a Cricut, you could do it that way, or I'm actually thinking of adding these to the supply section of Sketchyville. So if you have an interest in having mat board words that you can use in projects, let me know and I'll get on that for you. So I just painted the word black, and then I went over it with Rub and Buff Silver, which is a paint that you just kind of rub onto the surface of whatever it is you're painting. And because it looked a little too bright and was blending in with the sky portion of the box, I went back over it with the same green that I used to paint the bottom of the pond, and that's also used on the lid of the box. Once it was painted all pretty, I just used Fabri-Tac to glue it into the negative space area on the lid of my project. And here is the whole thing, absolutely complete. This project did not go according to plan at all. Not on the outside, not on the inside. But despite all the struggle I had with it, I really love how it turned out. I love the depth in the pond and the plants and the fish. And I'm pretty pleased with the end result, so I can live with that. If you haven't already, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more weird projects that are probably going to go terribly, terribly wrong. Until next time, stay sane.